Hey folks, welcome back to Penalty Box Woodshop, and this week I'm going to show you how to make these double-sided barn doors with no screws or hardware. The dimensions can be adjusted to fit anything from windows to doors, and with the right tools they're easy to make and can be batched out. So let's get started. For these barn doors, I'll be using rough cut poplar. I like milling my own lumber for projects like these because the rough cut material is cheaper and I can customize the dimensions to fit my needs. If you don't have the tools to mill your own lumber, then most lumber yards will sell pre-milled lumber for a slightly higher cost. I milled the horizontal frame pieces, which are also referred to as rails, to 4 1/4 inches wide and 1 1/2 inches thick. The vertical frame pieces, also referred to as stiles, were milled to the same thickness but were cut at 3 1/2 inches wide. The length of these pieces will be customized to the size of the doorway or window that the door will be covering. While I finish cutting these boards to length, I would like to say a quick thank you to Delta Machinery for sponsoring this video. I've been using Delta in my shop for years, and my most recent upgrade was this Gen 2 Delta Cruiser miter saw. If you'd like to see the review that I did on this saw, then you can click the link in the upper right corner that just popped up. Over at the table saw, I installed my dado stack to cut a dado 1/8 of an inch less than the thickness of the boards that I'll be using for the center panel. I set the fence to cut a dado at the center of the thickness of the rails and stiles. The cut only needs to be close to center and does not have to be exact. Using a test piece the same thickness as my rails and stiles, I cut a dado to check my fence settings. Once I made the first cut, I flipped the board around and ran it through again with the opposite face against the fence. This should slightly increase the width of the dado, as well as ensure that it is in dead center of the board. I then used the test piece to check the fit for the boards in the center panel. If the fit was too tight, I adjusted my fence and made another cut. And as you can see with this test fit, I like this fit to be slightly loose. After getting a good fit, I set my table saw blade height to 1/4 inch high, and I began cutting dados in each of the rails and stiles. After I cut a dado in each one of the boards, I then raised the blade another 1/4 inch and began making another dado cut. I made 1/4 inch incremental cuts until I reached a final cutting depth of 1 inch. Making these cuts in 1/4 inch increments will help reduce the stress on your table saw and table saw blade. After all the dados were cut, I set up my table saw to cut the tenons on the rails. For this cut, I did not move the table saw fence after cutting the dados, but I did adjust the blade height to slightly under the edge of the dado. Using my miter gauge and a backer board, I then made the cuts on the tenons for the rails. I tested the fit after each set of cuts and made slight adjustments to the blade height until I had a tight fit in the dados on the stiles. Once all the cuts were finished on the table saw, I did a dry assembly of the frame. This dry fit ensured that not only all the pieces fit correctly, but also allowed me to get the measurements for the center panel. When you're getting your measurements, don't forget to add the 1-inch makeup created by the dados. Also, while the frame was assembled, I placed a board at a diagonal angle on the back side and I clamped it in place. Then I used a pencil to mark these angles for later. Over at the miter saw, I cut the tongue and groove boards for the center panel to length. Next up, I assembled the panel and used a clamp to pull the boards tight together so that I could get a good measurement for the width. With the standard width of these tongue and groove boards, the panel was approximately 3 inches too wide. I removed the 2 outside boards and cut 1.5 inches off of each outside edge at the table saw. Cutting off each edge will keep the panel grooves centered between the door frames once it's assembled. Leaving the bottom rail in clamps, I removed the top rail and slid the center panel into place. Using wood glue on the tenons, I placed the top rail back in place and clamped it. After clamping the top rail in place, I laid the door flat on the ground and loosened the clamp holding the bottom rail. I removed the rail, added wood glue to the tenons, then tapped it back in place and tightened the clamp. After checking the door for square, I went back to the miter saw and cut 3/8 inch dowels to pin the tenons. Using masking tape, I marked a stopping point on a 3/8 inch drill bit to drill a hole approximately 3/4 of the thickness of the door frame. I drilled 2 holes on each of the 4 joints and drove the dowels in using wood glue. Then I used my flush cut saw to cut the dowels flush with the door frame. Not drilling the holes all the way through the frame prevents any worries about blowing the holes out when you drive in the dowels, and this depth works perfectly fine for pinning the tenons. I cut the boards for the decorative stretchers at the angles marked from earlier. Using the shadow line from my cruiser, I was able just to line it up with the mark and then make the cuts. The depth of the outside of the frame to the center panel was just over 1/4 inch on these doors. Since I had 3/4 inch thick boards, I saved material by marking half the thickness on the board and resawing them on my bandsaw. I brought them to final thickness on the planer and used brad nails and glue to attach them to the doors. I placed one on each side of the door so that the door would look identical from both sides. As I said in the beginning of the video, these doors are pretty easy to batch out, and I needed 2 for this project. I sanded the doors from 80 grit to 180 grit and hand sanded the hard to get areas with a sanding sponge. Here's a little tip for you. Using wood glue in the nail holes just before sanding will act as a good wood filler. With our doors completely sanded and ready for paint, you can see that this design can work for any size barn door, whether it be a full-size door or a window like what I'm using these for. And if I spin these around, you'll be able to see that the back side is identical to the front side, so that when you're outside the house looking in and these are shut, they look identical as they would if you were inside the house looking at them from that way. And with that, this week's project is complete. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get to all of them. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'll leave a link to all the tools that I use down in the description section below. And last but not least, please go check out penaltyboxwoodshop.com. Let me know what you think about all the blogs, builds, and tutorials that I have on my website. I'll be updating it regularly. And there's a newsletter you can subscribe to so that you know when I got new content coming out. As always, I appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next video.